All right. Training frequency. Uh, higher frequency is probably generally better, especially the longer you've been training and the more specific to the sport you're getting. Um, as you go on in your career, you should like there's periodization on a incredibly macro scale, the most macro scale, which is your entire lifting career, right? So should start fairly non-specific, well-rounded, just focusing on getting bigger and building up work capacity and whatnot. But then as time goes on, you focus more to your sport. So it's happening on all these different scales. So you micro, macro, micro, everything, right? Um, but yeah, so as you get better, higher frequency seems to be better. I know there's a couple lifters nowadays who are doing like SBD 6 days a week. I think Austin Ferkins is doing that. Uh, Agatha Shitko is as well. And they're fairly dominant. Um, so why is more better? Um, I have here bench more to bench more. That's something that's a common platitude. Platitude the right word? I think so. Common saying at least. Um, yeah. So why is that? Why is it better? Why should you bench more to bench more? Is more chances for skill development. Um, more if you're doing more reps, you, theoretically, if you're doing everything right, if you're recording yourself and you're actually working on your technique, obviously practicing your technique more is going to make it better. But on the other hand, if you have bad technique and you're practicing bad technique often, it's going to ingrain bad habits. But let's say you're doing everything right, really focusing on your technique and actually trying to make it better. You have more chances for skill development. You also have more chances for hypertrophy. If you're squatting twice a week, I for most people like training their legs twice a week. If they're really training their legs just for hypertrophy, twice a week is kind of all you can do, maybe 3 times. But if you're only squatting once a week and that's all you're doing for legs, you're not really gonna stimulate as much hypertrophy as you could be. Um, and then it's also easier to you know do more volume, right? Because if we're let's say you want to do 12 sets of bench in a week, and you're only benching once a week, uh, I don't 12 sets of bench in one day sounds pretty horrid, personally. For bench maybe not that bad, but like 12 sets of squats, oh, kill me. Um, yeah, and just being being in a more specific space, a lot of times is at least in the short term is going to be very very helpful for your performance. Um, yeah, but you know, if we could just only do squat, bench, deadlift, and get good at those, that's what we would do. But there's other factors at play. So bench less to bench more, meaning maybe we take back the frequency and up the intensity maybe, but just kind of scaling everything back and maybe doing some different work and whatnot. But because if we're doing high frequency, the main I say like this is a little bit from personal experience is like overuse becomes really a big factor. Um, I've noticed it like especially for me squatting uh fairly often, 3 times a week probably. Um, like low bar squat 3 times a week is beating the hell out of my elbows. um, Yeah, so that's the main thing. Higher fatigue costs as well. If you're because you're accumulating a lot more volume, right? So if you're squatting, I don't know, if you're doing 15 sets of squats a week, that's gonna fatigue you. It doesn't matter if some of those are maybe 15's a bit low, but like if you're doing 20 sets of squats a week, you're gonna get tired. Um, no, even 15. Why am I saying 20? What the heck? Um, I'm nervous. I don't know why I'm nervous. I'm talking to my computer. Uh, but I, you know, who knows? Um, and then you can't push high intensity as often if you're doing like if you're squatting 3 days a week. It's like okay, you could go hard on for me I go like fairly hard on Monday, and then Tuesday when I'm squatting again, it's like I could barely I'm doing like basically you know completely light work. It's nothing. Um, yeah, there's other things as well, but this is to me this is kind of the main stuff that's important. So factors that can also affect frequency, limb length. Um, everyone, the joke is that all intermediate lifters care about is limb length. Uh, I guess for me that's my I guess the new thing I've like limb length because I as an intermediate lifter myself, uh, I'm like this makes sense. Um, but yeah, limb length. So kind of like for example, longer arms is just going to be more range of motion on the bench press. Um, so you know, more range of motion is going to just lead to more fatigue, essentially. That's kind of the main thing, or not necessarily more range of motion. Also, just like how levers work. So if you have, I'll get into all the lifts specifically in a bit, but yeah, limb lengths can affect training frequency, training age. So as we discussed, if you're just starting out, probably you know should have a be more focused on building just a base of muscle, right? So you don't need as much frequency for that. Um, and if you've been training for a while, you maybe should be a little bit more specific. Uh, Absolute load. So like basically what I mean by this is, if you're a big bencher, if you're I don't know, let's say you're 242 and you're you're benching a lot, you're benching 300-400 pounds. That's a higher absolute load compared to a like a 63 kg lifter. I don't even know what that is in pounds. 141, something like that. Forgive me. So they're just going to be benching less because they're smaller. So if you're benching less, you could probably bench more often. Volume in other exercises, you're not going to be able to bench as often if you're also doing chest flies and shoulder press and stuff like that. Technique, that kind of gets into the limb length thing again. If you're making it easier on yourself, if you're doing low bar instead of high bar, sumo instead of conventional. Um, but even just small things like grip width on bench could play a factor. Um, yeah, diet phase obviously. Cutting your I don't know. Cutting probably you want to do less frequency, because for me I find when I diet it's like my joints don't recover as easily. Obviously my muscles don't either, but I just end up feeling really beat up really easily when I'm dieting. So like dialing back the frequency tends to help me. And then natty status, you'd think like a steroid user would sorry. So you think a steroid user would recover, like do more high frequency because they're gassed up, but No, because their joints are not growing as fast as their muscles, or getting stronger as fast as their muscles. Um, and they're odds are they probably have a higher absolute load if they're enhanced. So they actually benefit a little bit from less frequency. So that's why like all the West Side guys, they were all juiced up and they were like fairly low frequency twice a week for everything. Uh, and only one of them was heavy and one of them was uh dynamic effort, right? All right. So here I've got example of two different lifters here. I use Attack on Titan characters because this is it, I think this is gonna demonstrate my point a lot better than like picking actual lifters, which I've done later um in the presentation video, whatever. Um, because it's very exaggerated, right? So if you look at Zeke, the Beast Titan, he's got long limbs. Obviously, he's gonna be a greater absolute load because he's a lot heavier. Uh, he's gonna be less technical, and obviously less flexible. And close grip, kind of like I'm thinking like a power bench, like a Spoto or Julius Maddox. I mean, they're the two best examples. That kind of like close grip, sort of not bounce it obviously, but like give it some juice off the chest, sort of benching. Um, and then Levi, it's you can think of Lifter A as like a super heavyweight. The Beast Titan is a super heavyweight, and you can think of Levi as like a 63 or 74. Um, kind of more technical, like the IPF style lifter, I guess. Um, so yeah, shorter limbs. He's a short guy. I think in canon he's 5'4", maybe, something like that. So yeah, less absolute load and technical and flexible. And then he's doing the whole bulldog grip, max width bench. And he's pulling sumo, obviously. At least in this example, I don't actually know. I think if they were doing powerlifting, I think he would pull sumo. That's just my opinion. Um, not a, anyways. So let's go through some you know each of the lifts, and then at the end of the video we'll see like how each of these guys would lift, and then if you're watching this, you could kind of think, oh, who am I more built like? Not saying that anyone's built actually like freaking freaking Beast Titan, but you know a little bit. Some people, right? So squat. Uh, I'd say for this 1 to 3 times a week, probably pretty good. I know like the Lily Bridge was doing, I guess at 1/2 time a week. That seems pretty low. Uh, so yeah, 1 to 3. Um, and then yeah, leverages. This this uh this is Lane Norton on the left here. As you can see, he's folded over. I actually don't know how really long his femurs are, but this is like kind of how your squat ends up looking if you got really long femurs. Um, so I think that's gonna put a higher stress on the back if you're more folded over. Um, and then if you have long femurs, you might not have as strong quads. Just because it's harder to train them. Um, yeah. So, and if you look at the higher bar placement, like John Hack's kind of like a high bar or mid bar. Um, he's more upright, right? So that's just going to be less fatiguing, even if you can't quote unquote lift more absolute weight. I mean, obviously John Hack's the exception, or not? Yeah, no, he's an exception. He's an exception. He's lifting world records high bar. Um, but yeah, so theoretically, I think you could train that more frequently, like a high bar setup. Uh, beats you up less in the joints too. The high bar, like wrists, elbows. Like I said, I kind of have some elbow problems from my horrible shoulder mobility, and low bar squatting. Bench, uh, 2 to 5 times per week, I'd say. Uh, some people do 6. That's probably fine. Um, some people do 1. Uh, I I don't know. I've never made any progress benching once a week, but I'm not a big guy by any means. So for some people, I'd say like these numbers I say were kind of like average for like everyone. Obviously everything that's being said here is like can be accepted. There's other EX accepted. Um, like there's obviously going to be people who are outliers, but I'm saying this is kind of average, of what I learned, right? So long arms can lead to greater fatigue, greater ROM, right? Uh, but on the flip side, I found this wider grip actually like is more fatiguing on the shoulders. At least it was for me. Um, yeah, I found it was beating up my shoulders a little bit. But once again, horrible shoulder mobility. Uh, but why did my shoulder mobility get bad? It was because I was benching often and benching wide. I think the width had to do with it. It's definitely the benching often. Uh, right now, benching 4 times a week. I'm gonna take a break from doing that just to let my all my joints feel better. Uh, but yeah, higher arch, less range of motion, less fatigue. Kind of self-explanatory there. Also a little easier on the shoulder. Um, and then this is just a personal thing, but explosive technique seems harder with higher frequency. Um, because I switched to a close grip. Uh, like I don't know, an inch away from an inch in from the ring, so that's a pretty narrow grip by powerlifting standards. Uh, and I feel like it's hard for like I was trying the whole like sink and then shoot up, and it's still it I just like I I just felt gassed. Monday I bench heavy, feels fine. Tuesday I'm like, ugh, that doesn't feel right. And then and this was over several weeks. That's not just one time. So I don't know. That might be a thing that I'm just making up, honestly, but something I noticed, so I figured I would talk about it. Deadlift, 1 to 2 times a week. Once again, I personally am deadlifting 3 times a week right now. But that's because I just wanted to work on technique. I like my, I have one made deadlift day, one variation day, and then one like really light day. Like it was easy money just trying to work on my technique. Uh, for some reason, I haven't gotten it to really click yet. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Long arms and legs lead to less stress on the back. Mostly the long arms, not necessarily the long legs. Because the long legs is going to make your torso a little bit more closer to parallel with the floor. But if you got a short torso, there's not as much it's not as much of a lever on your back. I think that's the right physics term. Um, and then obviously sumo is going to be the least fatiguing. Knee extension is less fatiguing than back extension. Um, and then it's sumo is easier on your back. Most people are gonna pull more sumo. That's just kind of how it is. I think personally, you should be pulling sumo, unless it screws with your hips. Or apart from unless you have a wicked strong back, like John Hack is somebody who's like certainly got an incredibly strong back. So I like people like that, or KK. They should pull conventional. But for most people, sumo. That's just my opinion. Um, and that's coming from conventional puller. I have sumo just screws with my hips. Um, I could work it out if I really wanted to, but I don't know. I feel better pulling conventional anyways. I've tried to make sumo work several times, and I could like really keep grinding at it, but if it just doesn't seem worth the effort to me, because I'm not really built for deadlift either way. So I feel like the benefit I'm getting out of sumo is like very little. It's not none, but it is very little. Um, so that's why I'm just sticking to conventional, at least for the time being. All right. So yeah, you can see in these pictures like this Lamar Gant. He's like, you can see the bars right above his knees. He could probably deadlift fairly often. I don't know, like I'm not sure if he did. Um, but and then you look at John here, like not to say that he's obviously a great deadlifter. He's freaking the man. But like he's not like particularly built for deadlift. He doesn't have these incredibly long arms or anything. They're long, but they're not. I could have picked a better picture, but I just couldn't think of anybody. Because most guys who are not built for deadlift pull sumo for a conventional deadlift rather. So I could have just put a picture of sumo here, but everyone knows the difference between sumo and conventional. So I was like, oh, what's a conventional deadlift that would be maybe a little bit less fatiguing. All right. So yeah, so we're back to our two quote unquote examples here. And then based on this information, Beast Titan should be pulling with a little bit more low frequency, and Levi should be pulling with a little bit more high frequency. Just in general. Now the Beast Titan, maybe with his deadlift and those long ass arms, he's locking out just above his ankles here. Maybe he should be deadlifting with the higher frequency. On second thought, but whatever. It's not a perfect analogy, but I want to incorporate something I like into this video as well, besides powerlifting. Obviously, I obviously like powerlifting. Otherwise, why the hell would I make a video? So this is kind of just some example programming, I guess. Programming is strong. This is an example of split, right? So you could see this is kind of just like the upper lower split for the Beast Titan here. That's it. Squat. So you're doing low bar squat, freaking stiff legs, and you're doing bench, and then trying to do some more hypertrophy work because the bench is just all the lifts are just so fatiguing if you're real big. Yeah, and then Levi could squat. This is, I think, exactly my split at the moment. Yes, it is. Sometimes like depending, maybe I squat, do safety bar on Tuesday, and then Thursday it's just like pause squat, so still low bar, but so it's pretty specific, but whatever. So this is pretty much my exact split here. This is pretty high frequency. You could always go higher, but like this is pretty high. Yeah. So benching. I guess you're still technically only benching twice a week if you do it, but variation. If this is like a long pause bench, and this is touch and go, you're benching 4 times a week. Come on. Yeah, just introducing some variation to work on weaknesses, and maybe lower the load a little bit, or lower stress somehow, just to give yourself a break. All right, yeah, that's all I got. I thought this was gonna take only 10 minutes. I just now looked at the clock for the first time, and oh my god, I'm rambling. Jesus. Yeah, right on.